They show it was nearly impossible to sign up for the first several days on the healthcare.gov website. By the end of the first day, only 6 people, that's across the entire country, were able to successfully sign up for insurance.
I just gave up. I just kept spinning. Nothing happened.
On July 1st, 2010, a simplified version of healthcare.gov was launched by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS. You could input information about yourself and receive a cost estimate for health insurance, but there were no signups, enrollments, or payment processing. It was, however, successfully delivered on time and ran without issues. The next step was to build out healthcare.gov to include all the missing features and make it a fully fledged insurance marketplace. HHS created a new Office of Consumer Information and Insurance Oversight to implement this marketplace project. This was going to be the next hit thing in the government. It was a tech startup, encouraging creativity, innovation, disrupting the status quo, agility, data-drivenness, customer obsession, impact, web scale. 10 months later, HHS determined the new team was unable to handle the task and gave it to its older sibling, CMS, or Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Then HHS merged OCIIO into CMS, which posed a few challenges. The two teams had operated differently, and there was a culture clash that the startup mentality brought into the rest of CMS's rigid government bureaucracy. There was also no leader for the project as a whole. Those responsible for different pieces communicated through several layers of management. To make matters worse, the two highest levels of leadership, the administrator and principal deputy administrator, were just hired months prior. In interviews, teams gave very different descriptions of each other's tasks and did not know which teams owned which tasks. As a result, tracking progress and enforcing accountability was difficult, and there were frequent disagreements in policy and business requirements. With fairly rigorous work hours, the marketplace program had turnover so high you'd think it was an actual tech company. Officials in director-level positions often had tenures of less than a year. As many as 2/3 of these positions could be vacant at some points. On the software development side, CMS relied on contract work. They had no documented strategy for vetting and acquiring contractors, so the work of some of them was not the best. The engineers practice Scrum, which divides a big project into manageable tasks assigned to individuals during the planning meeting. Then everyone works on their tasks for a few weeks in what is called a sprint. During this time, there are daily stand-ups where everyone stands up to understand outstanding blockers and obstacles that anyone may have. Then they review the completed work, identify areas of improvement, and repeat forever. CGI Federal, the contractor responsible for much of the web development, claimed that CMS never properly communicated business requirements before planning, often requested changes mid-sprint, and often requested for changes too late in the process. CGI Federal also made its own share of questionable decisions, though. It was responsible for building the database, a key component which can make or break any system. They proposed to use both Oracle's SQL database as well as NoSQL, stating that NoSQL was more scalable. They did not, however, specify what NoSQL database they were going to use in the proposal, just that they were going to use it. Despite this hole in the design, it was nonetheless accepted by CMS, and only afterwards did CGI Federal begin to meet with NoSQL vendors. As with any government project, they were leaning towards the oldest platform they could find, MarkLogic. However, CGI Federal soon began expressing a reluctance to use MarkLogic, citing a lack of experience with the platform. This wasn't properly communicated though, as CMS had already formalized the selection of MarkLogic in the technical direction letter and informed CGI Federal that it was the MarkLogic way or the highway. The use of this unfamiliar platform caused development problems for the remainder of the project. CGI Federal also proposed the use of model-driven architecture, which uses software to convert models to code. CGI Federal was committed to this technique, calling it their bread and butter. However, it ended up becoming the biggest culprit for delaying coding progress. CGI Federal had built 60 to 70% of the code base with generated code and could not effectively integrate it with developer-written code. These issues persisted, but the scheduled launch date was still over 2 years out on October 1st, 2013, so the hope was that everything would fall into place by then. By January 2013, 2 years into development, CMS still hadn't finalized the business requirements. Auditors and other third parties stepped in, warning CMS that the launch was not going to be successful. They said that the program badly needed a real leader and that CMS should stop revising policy. To tackle the first piece of advice, CMS made its COO lead the marketplace program, but didn't formally communicate the change or clarify what this position even meant. Not to mention, this one person now basically had 2 jobs. Eventually, everyone quote-unquote sort of knew that the CMS COO was technically leading the project, but it wasn't very clear. To tackle the second piece of advice, well, let's just say that project requirements continued to change, changes were poorly communicated to the contractors invented undocumented ad hoc strategies to meet the deadline, and then the next batch of changes would arrive, giving no time to polish the half-baked work. In July, with 3 more months to go, CGI Federal demoed one of the simpler deliverables, the pre-enrollment account creation system, nicknamed Account Lite. It was slightly behind schedule, in part because CMS didn't ask for this feature until 2 months earlier in May. The demo, however, did not go well, as CMS found 105 defects with Account Lite. The extent of the problems raised some eyebrows. If they couldn't even deliver Account Lite, where were we on the build? At this point, tech managers in CMS began requesting additional support, which they would receive in the coming months, doubling their headcount by August. But given that the ramp-up time for developers is usually 2 to 3 months and the launch was just around the corner, this was far too late of a decision. Very late in the game, CMS decided to take a good look at CGI Federal's code and discovered that it was fraught with issues. First, they didn't document anything, but that's pretty standard, we can give them a pass here. Second, developers were pushing changes which would break other parts of the system, resulting in weeks of wasted time troubleshooting. This is a problem for systems that aren't regularly tested, so you aren't warned quickly when something breaks. With regular testing, you would see the test failure, see the recent change, and put 2 and 2 together fairly easily. Third, they had trouble properly using version control to track and deploy the correct changes. People worked off outdated branches and overwrote each other's changes. Fourth, the code was inefficient. For example, it was discovered post-launch that the website would make requests which queried the database hundreds of times for no reason, and each successive query would be more expensive as it was adding and retrieving more data each time. The technical staff were reluctant to communicate the bad news. Those responsible kept thinking and hoping that the next thing will solve more issues and we'll all be okay. Senior officials would sit in meetings across from me and not know there is an enormous fire burning behind them. On August 20, 40 days to go, CGI Federal was scheduled to provide a live demonstration but failed to do so and instead presented pictures of the software. On the same day, CMS began scoping down the project, cutting out non-essential features to build the minimum viable product. CMS confirmed with White House officials to delay the Spanish website to October 15, it was delayed further to December, and to push the Small Business Companion website to November. This was delayed until November 2014 the next year. Questions regarding testing also began to crop up as the due date was near. Although it's best practice to test your software, you can't test what isn't built, the engineer said. The testing environments and tooling were also incomplete and malfunctioning, and end-to-end testing was simply impossible as key parts of the system were still in progress. Regardless, CMS and contractors prioritized delivering the product on time rather than testing functionality. This is fine, they thought. The production launch is the end-to-end testing. The unwillingness to extend the deadline was not without reason, though. First, there were various miscommunications that led to many thinking that the deadline was statutory. Secondly, some HHS and CMS staff feared that since the White House had a public commitment to launch on October 1st, a delay may fuel efforts to repeal the Affordable Care Act. So there was a lot on the line here. By September, it was a race. CGI Federal and CMS offices were filled with staff and experts from multiple government offices who had no prior knowledge and therefore couldn't really contribute. How's the build going though? So ultimately, CGI Federal did stage 2 successful live demos in the weeks prior to launch. The chief security officer raised concerns that the site did not meet CMS's security requirements, as no security testing had been done. No problem, they could get an exemption to delay security testing to up to 6 months after launch. 3 days prior to launch, CMS officials conducted some performance testing and discovered the site could support far fewer concurrent users than expected. This was because the code was using more capacity than expected, maybe because it was sending 100 times more requests than necessary. The CMS officials immediately drove to Terramark, the contractor responsible for compute capacity, and told them to double everything in 3 days, or else. Terramark had done it, the capacity was doubled. They performed another load test and the concurrent user limit was raised substantially. Capacity was no longer a critical problem, maybe. Some other systems suffered outages on that day during testing though, but it was kind of whatever. Probably just some intermittent issue that will fix itself. Healthcare.gov experienced 250,000 concurrent users, 5 times higher than the anticipated volume, and experienced outages within 2 hours of launch. Only 6 people were able to apply on day 1. This was a national embarrassment. The White House immediately began damage control.
We're going to be speeding things up in the next few hours to handle all this demand that exceeds anything that we had expected.
The technical staff soon identified the main bottleneck. It was, the random system that failed during load testing the other day. This was EIDM, the service used for verifying identities, which was required for account creation. EIDM going down led to account creation going down, which led to the website being unusable. CMS immediately told QSSI, the contractor responsible for this system, to scale it up. Due to various miscommunications, QSSI did not realize that all visitors had to enter the website through EIDM, and therefore underestimated the capacity. The government shutdown on the same day of the launch also did not help, although contractors continued to work on the website during the shutdown. At this point, the government brought in an ad hoc technology team. These were experts from real tech companies around the nation, the Tech Surge, the best and the brightest, the A-Team, the Avengers. They were assembled and ready to fix up the mess, including the venerable Mark Zuckerberg, Ken Thompson, just kidding, I have no idea who was a part of this team. The A-Team worked with CMS and contractors to repair the website, and productivity increased by 9,000%. They fixed the bugs, refactored everything, and added a few optimizations. Within the login system, EIDM was replaced by the scalable login system, which was more scalable at logging in. HHS assured the public that the website would be running smoothly by late November, though they had decided on this without communicating with CMS leaders. This rather short timeline pressured the CMS staff and contractors to work quickly, so throughout this period, some slept in nearby hotels while working 24-hour shifts. Did they make it on time? Well, time not functioning was bigger than time functioning in early November, but by late November, we see a massive improvement. Now the website was only down 10% of the time. Eventually, the first enrollment period ended and traffic calmed down. The team can now shift away from putting out fires toward establishing better operating procedures. Those were dark days. In the end, the estimated contract value for the 6 contractors involved jumped from an initial $464 to $824 million. CGI Federal in particular had its contract value nearly quadrupled from $58 to $207 million. Despite the insane schedules and failures, many CMS officials and staff stood firm because they were truly committed to the project. It was a work of blood, sweat, and tears, but they had done it. It wasn't without compromises, but healthcare.gov was online sometimes.